June 19, 1944, 18,000 feet above the Philippine Sea, 1320 hours. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakamura couldn't suppress his confidence as he led his formation of 54 Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers toward the American carrier task force below. Flying in tight three-plane sections stacked in altitude, his formation presented the textbook approach perfected through years of Japanese naval aviation doctrine, coordinated mass attacks that overwhelmed defensive fire through sheer numbers and mutual support. Maintain formation integrity, Nakamura transmitted to his squadron leaders, watching the precise spacing of aircraft around him. American anti-aircraft fire requires direct hits. Our density makes individual targeting impossible. By the time their gunners track one aircraft, we are past their kill zone. Numbers are our armor. What Nakamura didn't know, what none of the confident Japanese pilots maintaining perfect formation discipline could have possibly imagined, was that the shells beginning to burst around them weren't trying to hit their aircraft directly. Each 5-inch shell carried a miniaturized radio transmitter that sensed when it passed within 70 feet of metal, detonating automatically and filling the sky with lethal shrapnel clouds that didn't require aimed fire to kill. Within 90 seconds, Nakamura's textbook formation would transform from a coordinated striking force into falling debris, destroyed not by accurate gunnery, but by physics that made formation flying, the cornerstone of Japanese air tactics, into a death sentence. The VT proximity fuse had arrived in the Pacific, and Japanese aviators were about to discover that the safety they found in numbers had become a mathematical guarantee of mass casualties. But on that June afternoon, as Nakamura began his attack dive, Japanese naval aviation had no idea they were flying into invisible kill zones that would destroy formation tactics perfected over a decade.
Japanese naval aviation tactics in 1944 were built on a foundation of coordinated mass attacks that had proven devastatingly effective from Pearl Harbor through 1942. The philosophy was mathematically sound. Concentrate enough aircraft in formation, and individual defensive fire becomes statistically insignificant. Captain Hiroshi Yamada, training officer for the 1st Air Fleet, explained the doctrine in a March 1944 manual that would be captured at Saipan. American anti-aircraft fire, while intense, requires direct hits to destroy aircraft. The probability of a direct hit on any individual aircraft is approximately 1 in 2,500 shells fired. Therefore, a formation of 50 aircraft attacking simultaneously presents the enemy with an impossible targeting problem. They cannot achieve sufficient direct hits to stop the formation before we reach attack positions. Our losses will be acceptable, our strikes will be devastating. This mathematics had worked brilliantly in the war's early years. At Pearl Harbor, massed formations had overwhelmed defenses. At Ceylon, coordinated strikes had sunk British carriers. Throughout 1942, Japanese formations had demonstrated that numbers and coordination defeated defensive fire. The tactics were refined to minimize individual exposure while maximizing formation effectiveness. Aircraft maintained tight spacing, usually 150 to 200 feet separation, allowing mutual defensive fire support while presenting a concentrated target that forced defenders to choose between tracking individual aircraft or firing barrage patterns that wasted ammunition. Commander Kenji Watanabe, a veteran dive bomber pilot with 85 missions, described the psychological advantage. Flying in tight formation with 50 aircraft provides confidence that no amount of individual skill can match. You know that American gunners cannot hit all of us. You see your wingmen beside you, above you, below you. A coordinated strike force that cannot be stopped by defensive fire. The Americans must hit your specific aircraft among dozens. The odds favor survival. The formation protects us. What Japanese aviators didn't understand was that American defensive technology was about to make those odds catastrophically wrong.
Devastatingly inaccurate against maneuvering aircraft. The 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun, the primary anti-aircraft weapon aboard American destroyers and cruisers, could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute to altitudes exceeding 35,000 feet. but actually hitting an aircraft required the shell to pass within approximately 8 feet of the target, a tiny volume of space in the enormous three-dimensional battlefield of aerial combat. Gunners mate First Class Robert Morrison, serving aboard the destroyer USS Lansdowne in 1943, recalled the frustration. We'd fire hundreds of rounds at Japanese formations and watch maybe 1 or 2 aircraft fall. The problem wasn't our guns, it was geometry. Even with the best fire control computers, we were trying to place a shell in an 8-foot radius around an aircraft moving at 250 miles per hour, maneuvering unpredictably at ranges of 10,000 yards. The math was impossible. We'd see our shells bursting near targets, close enough to watch in our binoculars, but near didn't matter. Only direct hits counted. The statistics supported Morrison's assessment. In 1943, American anti-aircraft fire required an average of 2,500 shells per aircraft destroyed. During the Battle of Santa Cruz, American ships fired over 20,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition to destroy approximately 8 Japanese aircraft, a rate of 2,500 rounds per kill. Vice Admiral Thomas Kincaid, analyzing anti-aircraft effectiveness for Pacific Fleet in December 1943, delivered a sobering assessment. Our anti-aircraft fire is insufficient to stop determined mass attacks. Japanese formations accept losses of 10 to 15% as acceptable casualties, knowing that 85 to 90% will reach attack positions. We cannot generate sufficient direct hits to change this calculus. Unless we achieve breakthrough improvements in hit probability, we will continue suffering carrier losses to coordinated strikes we cannot stop. That breakthrough was already in development, a technology so secret that even most naval officers didn't know it existed. The VT, Variable Time, Proximity Fuse, represented one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets, so sensitive that its use was initially forbidden over land where unexploded shells might be recovered by the enemy. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of requiring a direct hit, embed a miniaturized radio transmitter and receiver in the shell's nose. As the shell approached a metal target, radio waves reflected back to the receiver. When the return signal exceeded a predetermined strength, indicating the shell was within lethal distance, an electronic circuit triggered detonation. Dr. James Harrison, part of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory team that developed the VT fuse, explained the physics. A conventional shell must pass within approximately 8 feet of a target to achieve lethal fragment density, an incredibly small target volume. The VT fuse detonates when within 70 feet of the target, creating a fragment cloud approximately 140 feet in diameter. This increases the lethal volume by a factor of approximately 1,000. Suddenly, anti-aircraft gunnery isn't about precision, it's about getting shells near the target, and near is a much larger target than direct hit. The miniaturization challenge was extraordinary. The radio system had to survive being fired from a 5-inch gun, experiencing acceleration forces exceeding 20,000 Gs while remaining functional. The vacuum tubes had to work reliably despite the violent shock. The battery had to power the circuit for up to 30 seconds of flight time. Every component had to be mass-producible at costs allowing shells to be fired by the thousands. Technical Sergeant Martha Rodriguez, working on fuse production at the Eastman Kodak facility in Rochester, recalled the manufacturing challenge. We were building miniature radios that could survive forces that would pulverize conventional electronics, function reliably in conditions from tropical heat to Arctic cold, and cost less than $20 per unit. Each fuse contained 4 vacuum tubes smaller than your thumb, a battery, an antenna, and the electronic firing circuit, all packaged in a space smaller than a coffee cup. The tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch. One misaligned component and the shell was a dud. Yet we were producing 40,000 fuses daily by mid-1944. The initial tests of VT-fused ammunition in late 1942 produced results so dramatic that observers initially refused to believe them. At the Naval Proving Ground in Dahlgren, Virginia, conventional anti-aircraft fire against drone targets had achieved hit rates of approximately 4%, meaning 96% of shells missed. When VT-fused ammunition was introduced in December 1942, hit rates jumped to 37%. Captain Michael Chen, observing the tests, watched conventional shells burst harmlessly around targets, while VT shells seemed to hunt aircraft like guided missiles. The drone was flying at 18,000 feet, maneuvering randomly, Chen reported. Conventional ammunition created beautiful but ineffective bursts 50 to 100 feet from the target. Then we fired VT rounds. The first shell detonated 40 feet from the drone, close enough that fragments shredded the tail. The second shell, tracking the falling wreckage, detonated within optimal range and disintegrated what remained. 2 shells, 1 kill. Compare that to the 2,500 shells we averaged with conventional ammunition. The mathematical advantage was overwhelming. If conventional anti-aircraft fire required 2,500 shells per kill, and VT ammunition reduced that to 200 shells per kill, a 12.5x improvement in efficiency, then the same ammunition expenditure that previously destroyed 1 aircraft could now destroy 12. But the real revolution became apparent when testing against formations. Conventional shells, requiring direct hits, threatened only the individual aircraft they targeted. VT shells, detonating within 70 feet, created fragment clouds that could damage or destroy multiple aircraft if they were in formation. Lieutenant James Cooper, analyzing test results, identified the formation killing potential. Japanese tactics rely on tight formation flying, aircraft typically separated by 150 to 200 feet. A VT shell detonating in the middle of a 3-plane section creates a lethal fragment zone covering all 3 aircraft. The closer they fly together for mutual support, the more vulnerable they become to VT detonation. Their formation tactics, designed to defeat aimed fire, are perfectly optimized to maximize VT casualties. They're concentrating targets for us. The VT proximity fuse entered combat in January 1943 aboard cruisers and destroyers operating in the South Pacific. The security surrounding the weapon was absolute. Shells were issued only for missions over open ocean, where Japanese recovery of duds was impossible. Gunners were told only that they were firing special ammunition without explanation of how it worked. The first significant test came during a Japanese air raid on Guadalcanal shipping on January 5, 1943. Lieutenant Commander Robert Morrison, gunnery officer aboard USS Helena, received permission to fire VT ammunition against the incoming raid. 18 Betty bombers flying in tight formation at 12,000 feet. We fired 58 rounds of VT ammunition in approximately 3 minutes, Morrison's after-action report noted. Observed 4 confirmed kills, 3 probable kills, and visible damage to 6 additional aircraft. Compare this to our previous engagements where we expended 200+ rounds per kill. The effectiveness was immediately apparent. Multiple aircraft appeared to be damaged by single shell bursts. Fragments from shells detonating near one aircraft struck adjacent aircraft in formation. The Japanese pilots who survived reported experiencing anti-aircraft fire unlike anything they'd encountered. Warrant Officer Koji Hayashi, flying a damaged Betty back to Rabaul, described the confusion. The American shells were exploding around us without direct hits, yet aircraft were falling. Tanaka's bomber to my right was struck by fragments from a shell that burst 50 meters away, farther than any shell fragments should travel with lethal effect. 3 aircraft in our section were damaged or destroyed by shells that didn't hit any of us directly. It was as if the shells knew where we were and chose optimal detonation points. That description, shells that knew where we were, was closer to truth than Hayashi realized. Japanese naval intelligence received reports of unusually effective American anti-aircraft fire throughout early 1944, but failed to identify the proximity fuse as the source. Captain Hiroshi Yamada, analyzing combat reports at 1st Air Fleet Headquarters, noted the statistical anomaly. American anti-aircraft effectiveness has increased by approximately 300% since late 1943. Previously, formations expected 10 to 12% losses from anti-aircraft fire. Current losses average 30 to 35%. Additionally, multiple aircraft in tight formation are being damaged or destroyed by single shell bursts, suggesting American ammunition has been improved or gunners have achieved unprecedented accuracy. The actual explanation, radio-triggered proximity fuses, was so far beyond Japanese technological capability that it wasn't seriously considered. Japanese engineers had experimented with acoustic proximity fuses for anti-aircraft shells, but abandoned the approach as impractical. The concept of miniaturized radio systems surviving gun launch forces seemed impossible. Instead, Japanese intelligence attributed improved American anti-aircraft performance to better fire control radars and improved training. The recommended counter-tactic was to maintain tighter formations for mutual support, exactly the opposite of what VT fuses demanded. Commander Kenji Watanabe, reading the tactical guidance in May 1944, found it entirely logical. If American gunnery has improved, we counter by presenting more difficult targets through tighter formation flying and coordinated evasive maneuvers. A formation flying within 100 meters spacing provides maximum mutual support while making individual aircraft targeting more difficult. This is sound tactical adaptation to improve defensive fire. It was actually a tactical adaptation that would maximize casualties by ensuring multiple aircraft were within VT fragment range of every shell burst. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 would provide the first large-scale demonstration of VT proximity fuse effectiveness against massed Japanese formations, and Japanese pilots would finally comprehend what they were facing. The Japanese committed over 400 carrier aircraft to coordinated strikes against American Task Force 58 on June 19, 1944. They flew in textbook formations, tight sections, stacked altitudes, coordinated timing designed to overwhelm defenses through simultaneous attacks from multiple vectors. They flew directly into the most concentrated anti-aircraft defense in naval history, over 900 anti-aircraft guns, including 450 5-inch guns firing VT-fused ammunition at rates exceeding 10,000 rounds per hour. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakamura, leading his dive bomber formation toward the American carriers, watched the wall of anti-aircraft fire approaching his formation and initially felt the familiar confidence of an experienced formation leader. The shells were bursting densely, perhaps more densely than he'd seen before, but formations had survived heavy flak before. Maintain integrity, hold formation, push through the fire zone. Then, his wingman's aircraft simply disintegrated. Not hit by a shell, the aircraft exploded as if struck by multiple shells simultaneously, fragments shredding the entire airframe. Before Nakamura could process what he'd seen, 2 more aircraft in his formation fell apart in midair, their wreckage spinning toward the ocean 18,000 feet below. "Break formation," Nakamura transmitted frantically, abandoning doctrine as his formation died around him. "Scatter, independent approach." But scattering meant losing the coordinated attack, losing the mutual support, surrendering the tactical advantage that formations provided. And even scattered aircraft were being destroyed. VT shells didn't care whether aircraft flew in formation or independently. They detonated near any metal target within range. Gunner's mate Robert Morrison, serving aboard USS Alabama, watched his 5-inch mount crew firing VT ammunition at cyclic rate into the Japanese formations. "Every shell we fired seemed to hit something.
We weren't aiming at specific aircraft, we were firing into the formations and watching aircraft fall. 3, 4, sometimes 5 aircraft would fall from a single volley. The formations were disintegrating before they reached attack range. I'd never seen anything like it. It wasn't gunnery, it was slaughter.
The statistics from June 19th told a story of formation tactics meeting technological obsolescence. The Japanese launched 373 aircraft in 4 major strikes. Of those, 243 were shot down, 65% losses. American anti-aircraft fire accounted for approximately 180 of those kills, more than double the typical anti-aircraft effectiveness. But the real revelation was ammunition efficiency. American ships fired approximately 32,000 rounds of 5-inch VT-fused ammunition and achieved 180 kills, approximately 178 shells per aircraft destroyed. Compare this to the 2,500 shells per kill of 1943, and the VT fuse had improved kill efficiency by a factor of 14. Captain Thomas Chen, analyzing the battle results, identified the formation killing effect. Multiple instances of single shell bursts destroying or damaging 2 to 3 aircraft in tight formation. Japanese tactical doctrine concentrated targets within optimal VT fragment range. Their formations, designed to defeat aimed fire, became target-rich environments for proximity fuses. The tighter they flew for mutual support, the more aircraft each shell could damage. The effect was even more dramatic against the coordinated attack doctrine. Japanese strikes coordinated multiple formations approaching from different altitudes and vectors simultaneously, a tactic designed to divide defensive fire and ensure some formations reached attack positions. Against VT ammunition, coordinated attacks merely ensured that defensive fire had multiple target-rich formations available continuously. Gunners didn't need to choose which formation to engage. They fired into any formation within range, knowing each shell would find targets. The coordination that should have divided defensive attention instead provided continuous targets for weapons that didn't miss.
The Japanese pilots who survived the Philippine Sea returned with reports that their commanders initially refused to believe. Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, one of 43 pilots who returned from a strike of 128 aircraft, filed a combat report that would fundamentally challenge Japanese tactical doctrine. American anti-aircraft shells are detonating without direct hits, creating fragment clouds that destroy aircraft within 50 to 100-meter radius. Tight formation flying results in multiple aircraft being damaged or destroyed by single shell bursts. Observed 14 aircraft from my formation fall in less than 2 minutes, too rapid for aimed fire to achieve. Assessment: Americans have deployed new anti-aircraft ammunition that does not require direct hits. Formation tactics are suicidal against this weapon. Captain Yamada, reading the reports from multiple surviving pilots, faced an impossible conclusion. Either multiple experienced pilots were exaggerating losses and inventing technical capabilities to excuse tactical failure, or the Americans had developed ammunition that fundamentally changed anti-aircraft warfare. The math forced acceptance. With 65% losses, formation tactics weren't just ineffective, they were guaranteeing mission failure before strikes reached targets. Something had to change, or Japanese naval aviation would be destroyed not by superior American pilots, but by defensive fire that made formation flying impossible. The Americans have achieved something we considered impossible, Yamada reported to Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the Mobile Fleet. Anti-aircraft ammunition that detonates in proximity to aircraft without requiring direct hits. Our formation tactics, perfected over years of combat, have become obsolete. Flying in tight formation now guarantees casualties rather than providing mutual support. We must fundamentally rethink our approach.
But fundamentally rethinking air combat doctrine would take months, time Japanese naval aviation no longer had. The VT proximity fuse had arrived, and every formation flying toward American ships was flying into invisible kill zones where physics, not gunnery skill, determined survival.
July 1944. Japanese naval aviation faced an impossible dilemma. Every tactical principle they'd refined through years of combat had become obsolete overnight. Captain Hiroshi Yamada, now Chief Tactical Officer for what remained of Japanese carrier aviation, struggled with recommendations that contradicted everything he'd taught. Formation flying concentrates aircraft within lethal radius of American proximity-fused shells. Dispersed attacks reduce mutual support and coordination. We must choose between formation discipline that guarantees heavy casualties or dispersed tactics that reduce striking power. Neither option provides acceptable outcomes. The mathematics were brutal. Tight formations, aircraft separated by 150 feet, placed multiple aircraft within the 140-foot fragment radius of VT shells. Dispersing to 500-foot spacing eliminated multiple aircraft kills, but also eliminated formation benefits and made individual aircraft easier to target by fighters. Commander Kenji Watanabe, one of the few experienced formation leaders who survived Philippine Sea, attempted to develop counter-tactics in July training exercises. We practiced ultra-low altitude approaches, below 200 feet, where ships cannot depress guns sufficiently. We practiced high-speed diving attacks, minimizing time in the kill zone. We practiced scattered approaches from multiple vectors simultaneously. Every tactic proved inadequate. Low altitude made us vulnerable to small caliber fire and fighter interception. High-speed dives reduced accuracy. Scattered approaches surrendered our coordination advantage. The Americans have developed a weapon that makes our core tactical doctrine suicidal. But the most devastating realization was that VT ammunition had eliminated the mathematical advantage of massed attacks. Previously, launching 100 aircraft against a task force guaranteed that 85 to 90 would survive defensive fire to reach attack positions. With VT ammunition achieving 60 to 70% kill rates, massed attacks became exercises in mass suicide rather than overwhelming force. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, reviewing July training results, faced the unavoidable conclusion. We can no longer conduct coordinated massed strikes against American forces. The casualties are unsustainable. We must develop new tactics or cease carrier operations entirely.
The emergence of organized kamikaze tactics in October 1944 was partly born from the recognition that conventional formation attacks had become impossible against VT-fused defenses. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, proposing the special attack units at a staff meeting in October 1944, made the calculation explicit. Conventional bombing attacks against American task forces now suffer 70% casualties before reaching attack positions, with remaining aircraft achieving perhaps 5% hit rates. We expend 100 aircraft to achieve 1 to 2 hits. Special attack tactics guarantee 1 hit per aircraft if the aircraft reaches the target. The Americans' proximity-fused ammunition changes nothing if our goal is simply to reach impact distance. Their shells destroy aircraft at 50-meter range. We need to reach 0-meter range. The weapon that makes formation attacks impossible is less relevant against individual aircraft accepting inevitable destruction. The logic was coldly rational. If VT ammunition made formation survival impossible, eliminate formations. If coordinated attacks guaranteed casualties before reaching targets, accept casualties as the attack method rather than a byproduct. Kamikaze tactics didn't solve the VT fuse problem. They acknowledged its inevitability and attempted to achieve something before the inevitable occurred. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, selected to lead the first organized kamikaze strike on October 25, 1944, understood the tactical mathematics. In conventional attack, I lead a formation knowing most will die before reaching targets and survivors may miss. In special attack, I know I will die, but if I reach the ship, my death achieves certain damage. The American proximity-fused shells will destroy me whether I try to survive or not.
At least this way, my death has purpose. But kamikaze tactics couldn't escape VT ammunition's mathematical certainty. Individual aircraft or formations, the physics remained constant. Shells detonating within 70 feet created lethal fragment zones. Kamikaze aircraft still had to survive the approach through increasingly dense VT-fused defensive fire.
The battle for Okinawa in April-June 1945 provided the final definitive demonstration of VT proximity-fused dominance. Japanese forces committed over 1,900 kamikaze sorties in 10 major kikusui, floating chrysanthemum, attacks against American naval forces. American ships, now fully equipped with VT ammunition and refined defensive tactics, created anti-aircraft barriers so dense that survival to target range became statistically improbable. Gunner's Mate First Class Robert Morrison, serving aboard USS Laffey during the April 16th attack, experienced the most intense kamikaze assault any ship survived. We were attacked by 22 aircraft over 80 minutes. Our 5-inch guns were firing VT ammunition continuously. We expended over 800 rounds. The Japanese came individually and in small groups, diving from all vectors. The VT shells were creating fragment clouds so dense the sky looked like black smoke. Aircraft were being destroyed 1,000, 2,000 yards out, farther than we'd ever achieved kills with conventional ammunition. 6 aircraft got through to hit or near miss us. Without VT ammunition, all 22 would have reached attack range. We'd have been destroyed. The USS Laffey survived with 31 crew killed and severe damage, testament both to VT effectiveness and to the limitations of even revolutionary technology against determined attacks. But the broader statistics told the story of VT dominance. During the 10 Kikusui attacks, Japanese forces launched 1,465 kamikaze sorties against American ships. Of those, approximately 1,100 were destroyed by defensive fire before reaching targets, 75% attrition. VT-fused anti-aircraft fire accounted for roughly 800 of those kills, approximately 72% of defensive victories. Captain Thomas Chen, analyzing Okinawa defensive statistics for Pacific Fleet, identified the critical success factor. Average ammunition expenditure per kill dropped to 150 rounds of 5-inch ammunition, 10 times more efficient than conventional ammunition. More significantly, kills are occurring at greater ranges. Average engagement range increased from 2,000 yards with conventional ammunition to 3,500 yards with VT. We're destroying aircraft before they reach dive bomb or torpedo release points. The few that survive to attack range have already flown through multiple kill zones. They're damaged, pilots are injured or dead, aircraft are barely controllable. VT ammunition hasn't made us invulnerable, but it's made coordinated attacks by intact aircraft essentially impossible.
By spring 1945, Japanese aviators were attempting increasingly desperate tactics to counter VT effectiveness, all proving inadequate. Ultra-low altitude approaches, flying below 100 feet to avoid gun depression limits, made aircraft vulnerable to small caliber fire and catastrophic crashes when hit. The few aircraft that reached ships at such altitudes were usually so damaged from light anti-aircraft fire they couldn't achieve effective attacks. Night attacks attempting to use darkness to avoid visual tracking proved minimally effective. American ships equipped with radar fire control could track and engage aircraft in total darkness, with VT fuses functioning identically day or night. Additionally, the radar proximity combination meant shells could find targets even when gunners couldn't see them. High-altitude attacks, attempting to stay above effective VT range, surrendered accuracy and made aircraft vulnerable to fighters operating with altitude advantage. The few high-altitude attacks attempted suffered catastrophic losses to fighter interception. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakamura, attempting to develop counter-tactics for the dwindling remains of Japanese naval aviation in May 1945, concluded despairingly, "There is no tactical solution to proximity-fused ammunition. Flying in formation concentrates targets for multi-kill weapons. Flying dispersed eliminates coordination and mutual support. Flying low makes us vulnerable to light weapons.
Flying high makes us vulnerable to fighters. Flying at night provides no advantage because their radar tracks us and their proximity shells work in darkness. The Americans have deployed a weapon that makes air attack against their ships practically suicidal regardless of tactics employed. Beyond the physical casualties, VT ammunition destroyed Japanese aviator morale through the psychological horror of facing weapons that seemed to hunt them. Pilot Officer Koji Hayashi, surviving 3 missions against American task forces in April 1945, wrote in his diary, "The American shells do not miss. They explode around you, beside you, above you, always close enough that fragments strike your aircraft. You watch your formation mates simply disintegrate as shells burst among them. There is no skill to evade, no maneuver to escape. You fly through clouds of fragments knowing the next burst might be the one that kills you. It is not combat. It is flying through an invisible minefield where every shell creates a kill zone, and you have no way to see where those zones are until you're already inside them." This psychological impact manifested in physical symptoms. Medical officers reported pilots experiencing proximity fear, anxiety attacks, hypervigilance, refusal to fly in formation, even physical illness before missions. Pilots who had flown dozens of missions against conventional anti-aircraft fire were breaking down after 2 to 3 missions against VT-defended targets. The terror was amplified by the seeming impossibility of the weapon. Pilots understood conventional anti-aircraft fire. Shells that had to hit you directly could be evaded through maneuver and luck. Shells that exploded near you and killed you anyway violated their understanding of aerial combat. The psychological impact of facing weapons that seemed like magic or divine intervention against them was devastating. Captain Hiroshi Yamada, attempting to maintain morale among surviving aviators, found conventional encouragement inadequate. How do I tell pilots to maintain courage against weapons they cannot understand or effectively counter? They know the Americans have developed shells that explode without direct hits. They've watched formations torn apart by fire that seems to hunt aircraft. Courage becomes less relevant when the weapon you face operates by physics you cannot defeat through skill or bravery. You can be the most skilled pilot in the Pacific, and proximity-fused shells will kill you just as dead as they kill a rookie.
Japanese aviators had faced the proximity fuse and learned what formation looked like when it became fatal. The mathematics that should have provided safety in numbers instead guaranteed casualties. The tactics perfected through years of combat became suicide in seconds. And the sky that had once belonged to coordinated strikes became a zone where physics killed more efficiently than any human gunner could achieve. They had laughed at American anti-aircraft fire in 1942, dismissing it as impressive but survivable. By 1945, they flew through clouds of VT fragments, knowing that survival was statistical improbability and death was mathematical certainty. The laughter had stopped. Only the explosions remained.